What's up, everyone? Something came up, so girl, you know what is taking the week off. But we will be back next week with a brand new episode. In the meantime, we are bringing you something special. This one is the return of my true crime podcast, True Crime with Dannie B Speaks. Keisha and I want to thank everyone for your ongoing support, and we will catch up with you all later. In the meantime, please sit back and enjoy the podcast. So here we are, back with another episode. Just a few months after the last one I did back in October, and sincerely, I am sorry. I really am. But life happens, work happens, but we are back. That's all that matters. True Crime with Dannie B Speaks, of course, is going to keep on going. I am Dannie B, aka Tahir. So here we go. Now, this episode is going to be a little different than past ones. We're going to do some updates on a couple of high-profile cases, and not just any cases. These two mean a lot to me as someone entering the true crime podcasting world. The first case we are going to review is about former Sweetie Pie star, dumbass Tim Norman, and the second case I'm going to talk about is the Adnan Syed case. As I mentioned, both of these cases are very instrumental to me. The reason for that is because the case against Tim Norman was the first episode I did on my true crime podcast. Actually, it was the first 2.5 episodes where I focused on that case. I will recap it a few, then give the update. As for the second case we're going to cover, I learned about the Adnan Syed case while listening to my first ever true crime podcast, which many of you may be familiar with. It was the Serial podcast, which is hosted by Sarah K. Why do I keep saying her name like that? Sarah Koenig. Good Lord, slow down, Danielle. Now, I had never heard of this case before, but I started to follow every single podcast that discovered this case. And not only was this the first true crime podcast that I got into, but it really made me want to start my own true crime podcast. So I wanted to do one since back then. And it took me a couple years, just like it did, finally. Well, actually, it took me longer to start my Dannie B Speaks the podcast, but that's a whole nother thing. Let's get back to this. Now, honestly, I never thought that I would, especially after starting Dannie B Speaks the podcast. But I always said with my brand, I have to do what I enjoy. That's the thing. Because if I lose interest, I'm not going to be able, you all will tell. If I'm doing stuff just because I feel like it's popular or because, I think it's what everyone else wants to hear. I mean, you do want to do that, but you still have to do what you enjoy. Sadly, true crime is very interesting to me, and I get hooked on certain cases. This was actually one of them, and we will probably be spending a little more time discussing this one because I have never discussed it on this show. I had a script and everything done to talk about this show. To talk about this case. I apologize. And maybe I will record it one day, but now that the case is over for now, because in my opinion, it isn't over, and I'll get into that later. I mean, it's over for Adnan, yes, but there still needs to be justice for the victim's family, but I will get into all of that later on in the show. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let me give you a little background on the Tim Norman case and where everything stands now. So in March 2016, Tim Norman's nephew, 21-year-old Andre Montgomery, was murdered in St. Louis. Andre Montgomery, he became a fan favorite on the hit show Sweetie Pies, which aired on the OWN network from 2011 to 2018. So yes, the show was still running after Andre was murdered. Let's keep that in mind. Tim Norman, who is the only surviving son of the matriarch and Sweetie Pie's founder and owner, Miss Robbie Montgomery, who is a former Icette from back in the day with the Ike and Tina Turner Review. Miss Robbie's oldest son, Andre Sr., was murdered when Andre Jr. was just a baby. Not long after that, Andre's mom moved from St. Louis to Texas. I can't remember which city. When he was in high school, his mom sent him up to live with his grandmother so that he could graduate high school, which he actually did on the show. We got to see him graduate, and also learn the restaurant business because she really wanted Andre and Tim to work together to keep the Sweetie Pie's name going. Tim, from the beginning, was not really a fan favorite, it seemed like. I didn't really care for him. I did admire his work ethic. I was just like, wow, he's really trying to, do things, but you saw him doing a little too much. And then as time went on, it became a lot. Now, most people gave Tim the benefit of the doubt because he had just come off a 10-year bid for armed robbery. After serving that sentence, he went right into the restaurant business with his mother. I mean, he was very lucky and fortunate. His mother had these restaurants and, she was trying to grow the brand, and he really had a vision and was, helping her work towards that. But he started getting money hungry. And not only that, you could kind of just tell that he really wasn't a good person. He tried to come off as real nice and caring and, certain things, but the things that he would do and say and how he would treat certain people, like his employees and his family, the way he talked to his mother sometimes. I understand they were in business together, but still, and some of the decisions he made seemed to only benefit him. From the way he treated his ex-girlfriend who was pregnant, I believe it was during the first season of the show, and how he just wasn't there for his son. Now, he claimed that he was working a lot, and we can only go by what was shown on the show and what people said, but he didn't seem to be around at all. He made these excuses constantly that he was trying to build this empire, which is, good, but there seemed to be a lot more going on. It got so bad at one point that his own mother and business partner had to sue him to stop using her money and name opening up these restaurants all over the country because most of them were failing and they were losing money. Tim, remember, was also accused of stalking his ex-girlfriend, who is former Basketball Wives star Jennifer Williams. Now, at the time, some people were kind of like, because Jennifer could be a little, dramatic and everything like that, which we've seen. But after what we know now, who knows, it could have been true. I never doubted it, but I was still kind of giving the side eye at both of them, honestly, because, neither one of them are really my favorites, so it is what it is. Now, as for his relationship with Andre, it just never looked right. You could tell that Tim did not care for Andre. He was always cold to him, mean, and just wasn't good to him at all. It seems from what we know now that he was side-eyeing Andre at times because he didn't want him to be a part of Miss Robbie's estate. He didn't want him to be a part of this business. That meant sharing. Because of course, he knew that her grandson, especially her oldest grandson, was going to be a beneficiary to her estate. And Tim did not want to share any of that money, and he obviously had no intention of ever letting Andre get a piece of that pie. Never. So as I mentioned, after Andre's murder, Sweetie Pies aired for 2 more seasons. And guess who had all of the nerve to take his mother to the house where Andre was murdered, acting all concerned and, just explaining what happened. He knew all the details about what happened. So, that should have been like, ooh, that should have been trigger right there. But nobody was expecting that he was going to be accused in another year or so of being involved in this and actually orchestrating it. So they had a memorial for Andre on the show where the families came together. Of course, Tim didn't attend the memorial. He was, quote unquote, working. Okay, whatever, in another state. Just seeing how hurt that family was, of course, and still is, I'm sure. He just couldn't care less about being there with his family for such a special moment, and to me, that spoke volumes. So, fast forward to this past September of 2022, Tim was actually found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder for hire, and conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud in relation to his nephew's 2016 murder. Oh, and did I mention that Tim took out a $450,000 life insurance policy on Andre, which, first of all, how and why? Come on now. So also before Andre's murder, there was a break-in at his mother's house, Miss Robbie's house. There were rumors that Andre somehow found out that Tim was involved in the break-in and was about to tell Miss Robbie that could have played a part in his murder, but I don't believe anything ever came from that. Now, I'm not going to really elaborate on that, but that was one of the things that at one point was being said. Now, I always just thought that he murdered, or had Andre murdered, I should say. Let me take that back, that he had Andre murdered because greedy-ass hips aplenty didn't want to share any of that money, as I mentioned before. I just think that's what it was all about. It was about money. So, this past week, on March 2nd, 2023, almost 7 years to the date of Andre's murder, Tim was sentenced to life in prison. Now, don't quote me, but I thought I read that he got 2 consecutive life sentences for all his charges. Of course, he is still denying any involvement in the murder, even with this fierce paper trail following him and those hips. Miss Robbie poor thing. I mean, she's still in denial. She even wrote a letter to the court begging them to spare her son and claim his innocence. I mean, okay, I understand Hips is her only surviving son, but come on now. He has been convicted and sentenced in the murder of your own grandson. Once again, your oldest grandson, your deceased son's only child, who is also his namesake. I mean, it's really sad that greed will destroy everything and everyone involved. No one else in the family has ever spoke out regarding this case, I don't believe. Maybe they will one day, but we haven't heard anything from them yet. Oh, but of course, Tim didn't work alone, and he definitely didn't pull the trigger. Of course he didn't. But Tim is the only one of the four involved who has yet to claim responsibility. Shocker. So thankfully, the rest of the crew has gone down as well. Let's start with the trigger man, the murderer, Travell Hill. He was sentenced to 32 years in prison in October of 2022 after pleading guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit murder. I promise y'all I can talk. And one count of murder for hire. Terica Ellis, the femme fatale, if you will, she basically was the one who lured Andre to the location where he was going to be ambushed and killed. So this heifer only received 3 years in prison, which is bullshit. After she pleaded guilty to a murder for hire conspiracy charge, there had to be some information she gave up or something to only get 3 years. I mean, because her actions led to a murder. I don't know. I mean, whatever. So yeah, she got 3 years. Okay. Lastly, Wael Yangam, also known as Wally. I still don't know how to pronounce his name, and I really don't give a shit. But anyway, his involvement came as the person who helped Hips Aplenty file a claim on Andre's life insurance policy after his death. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison as well, more bullshit, after pleading guilty to wire and mail fraud conspiracy charges. This was just such a sad and nonsensical crime, and everyone involved got what they deserved. A little bit more they could, some of them could have got, but whatever. Tim, bye. Go away. But we know you are such a narcissistic piece of shit. You aren't going anywhere anytime soon, if ever. Miss Robbie, ma'am, I'm sorry, but accept Tim's fate. Try to enjoy your remaining years. I know it's going to be hard. Enjoy your sisters, nieces, nephews, your grandson, Timmy. I know it is hard. I know it's hard to accept not only that your own child is a complete and total monster, but that he orchestrated the murder of your own grandson. And I know it's easier said than done. Please, just for your health, and like I said, to enjoy your remaining years, just please try to move on. Of course, you're still going to love Tim. I know you do. That's your baby, that's your child, but he's trash. So there's that. Well, let's take a look at the updates from the Adnan Syed case. So on September 19th, 2022, after spending 23 years in prison, 41-year-old Adnan Syed walked out of the Baltimore City Circuit Court a free man after the judge overturned his conviction. In 2000, Adnan Syed was convicted of the 1999 murder of his ex-girlfriend, 18-year-old Hae Min Lee. Adnan, at the time of the murder, was 17 years old, a high school senior with a bright future ahead of him. Instead of graduating high school and going off to college as the plan was, he ended up serving a life sentence after being found guilty of murder, robbery, kidnapping, and false imprisonment. Nothing ever connected Adnan to the death of Hae Min Lee except him being the ex-boyfriend and this flimsy fabricated testimony of Jay Wilds, who was his friend. And I put friend in quotes because girl. However, Wilds testified that he helped Adnan bury Hae's body in the park, but more on that later. It appeared from the beginning that the corrupt Baltimore Police Department coached Jay into a story, especially after you were able to listen to the tapes and of the interrogation and everything like that. I mean, they basically coached him until he got the story right that they wanted to present to the prosecutor, I should say. It took them a while because, as many people who knew Jay said that he wasn't the smartest person and he was a compulsive liar, a bad one, but a compulsive liar nonetheless. So what happened to Hae Min Lee on that cold January late afternoon in 1999? Hae was murdered after leaving school that day on her way to pick up her little cousin from school. Hae, who was extremely responsible, didn't show up to pick up her cousin, and when she didn't show up, her family knew something was wrong. It wasn't until about 2 weeks later that her body was found in a very remote, shady park in Baltimore City. After years of appeals and even even after being granted, then denied, new trials, Adnan stayed in prison. The system just seemed to be working against him, and it appeared to many, especially after diving into the case from podcasts and other internet sleuths, the cracks started to show, and not only was the Baltimore Police Department being looked at, the corrupt justice system was also being exposed. It seemed to appear that the city did not want to admit their faults in this case and the way that everything happened because it would expose way too much, and it did. With podcasts like Serial and Undisclosed, it dug really deep into the case after revealing an alibi witness who was with Adnan on their school's campus when Hay was being murdered. It exposed the weak representation that Adnan had from his attorney, and of course, how Jay's confession and testimony just completely fell apart. Not only were there the power of podcasts and YouTubers diving into this case, in 2019, HBO aired a 4-part documentary called The Case Against Adnan Syed, revealed a lot more. For one, it showed that DNA tests that were taken over and over again on Hay's body and her belongings, nothing came back to Adnan, nothing at all. Another thing was the exposure of the corruption and even Jay's ass admitting that he lied to get out of a drug charge. So thanks to a new Maryland law and a city attorney, Marilyn Mosby, who wasn't worried about saving face, this law gave prosecutors the discretion to modify the sentences of offenders who were under 18 at the time of their crimes and had already served 20 years in prison. So Adnan fell right under that category. On September 14, 2022, prosecutors asked the judge to overturn his conviction. It appears that after further investigations, they had uncovered potentially 2 alternative suspects in Hay's murder. The thing is, investigators and prosecutors first involved in this case back in 1999 and 2000 knew about at least one of the suspects by threats that he had actually made to Hay. See, if they would have just actually investigated in the first place, you know what, let me move on. Let me just keep on going because I can go down a whole nother rabbit hole. So anyway, that was September 14, 2022. And 5 days later, Adnan walked out of prison and served home detention while waiting to see if prosecutors would request a new trial or not. Less than a month later, on October 11, 2022, all charges were dropped against Adnan, and he finally became a free man. Where is Adnan now? Things are looking up for him right now. I mean, while in prison, not only did he graduate high school, but he also started taking classes at Georgetown University due to this program they have. It's an inmate program that the university runs called Prisons and Justice Initiative, also known as PJI. So he was able to obtain a Bachelor of Liberal Arts degree while in prison. This past December, Georgetown has actually hired Adnan as a program associate for the PJI program. This program is a Georgetown organization that addresses the root causes and consequences of mass incarceration, and it offers educational programs and training for incarcerated individuals and returning citizens. In his role, Adnan supports PJI programming, including Georgetown's Making an Exoneree class, in which students reinvestigate decades-old wrongful convictions. They create short documentaries about the cases and work to help bring innocent people home from prison. I love that because there are way too many innocent people in prison, or people who are in prison who may have committed a crime who don't need to be there as long as they are. But that's a whole nother subject for a whole nother day. But the way I feel, this case is far from over. For Adnan, yes. But what about Hay's family? All of these years, they believed Adnan killed their loved one because that is what the police told them. And of course, he was found guilty. You know that with this, it is just opening new wounds, not only the old ones, but new ones as well. I just hope that they go after these alternative suspects and put the same vigor and energy as they did to Adnan years ago when he was just a child. So thank you all for tuning in to True Crime with Dannie B Speaks. I truly hope that you enjoyed this update show. Don't forget to check out my other podcast, Dannie B Speaks, the podcast. You can check out all past episodes on my YouTube page, Dannie B Speaks, as well as my website, DannieBSpeaks.com. I most likely, going forward, will post True Crime one week and Dannie B Speaks the following week for now, unless I have to jump on and do an emergency episode on something that happens. But my goal is to have all 3 of my podcasts post on the same day, but we'll see. Give me time to work it out, but the podcasts are coming. If you haven't heard, which I'm sure you have by now if you follow me. I have a third podcast out. It's actually in its fourth season now, and it's titled Girl You Know What, that I co-host with my longtime friend Keisha, who was the owner and operator of Wellness and Women, as well as Flowing Tresses. You can follow her social media and visit her website under her brand name, Wellness and Women. That will lead you to all of her other businesses and information as well. This podcast is just two friends who talk about any and everything, but there's always a message or lesson within our discussions, and we want y'all to be a part of the conversation. So we want you all to feel like you are there with us. So check it out if you haven't yet. I know you will enjoy it. I know you will. And you can follow our show's IG page at girl_you-know-what. You can also email us at girlyouKnowWhatPodcast@gmail.com. You can listen to all three of these podcasts on my website. Again, that's DannieBSpeaks.com, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, Audible, and again, my YouTube page, Dannie B Speaks. Speaking of my YouTube page, first, I'm going to need all of you to go ahead and subscribe. My page not only houses my podcast, but you can also enjoy nostalgic videos that I may come across, or even ones that I create myself, working on that. Music mashups, working on those. And other original content will be coming very soon. I promise y'all it is coming. As I mentioned on Dannie B Speaks podcast, where you can listen to a new episode this week as well, I am working on the lighting and cameras and everything like that so that I can start doing videos, because I'm really excited to start doing that. I have a lot of ideas and I just really want to get that out to y'all. So I promise reactions, reviews, so much more is coming to my YouTube page. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Dannie B Speaks. Also follow me on Apple Music, where I share some of my playlists that I actually create myself. I am under Tahir Ali on Apple Music. If you need to reach out to me for any business inquiries, such as promoting your business, products, etc., on my podcast, on my website, my social media platforms, if you want to discuss collaborating with me, being a guest, sponsoring me, please hit me at DannieBSpeaks@gmail.com for all business inquiries. The merch line is on hold, but it is coming. I'm working on designs here and there, but it's taken a lot longer than I thought. I promised like a year ago that it would be out, but it is a lot going. It's a lot into it. The designing. I'm not an artist, so I'm really trying to just do everything myself because I don't really have the money to put into it, until money starts flowing in, but we're getting there. So as always, I truly, truly, truly appreciate you all. Be sure to continue to support or start supporting the Dannie B Speaks brand. It would be so greatly appreciated, y'all. I promise it will. All you have to do is just know that a follow, a share, word of mouth, it can truly go a long way. It really can. So until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other, and I will catch you all on the next one. So just take care, y'all. Peace out.